be alive in this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canada hockey fans in the United States.
The Hockey Time Machine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hockey Time Machine. I'm Glenn Dreyfus. 22 million people were living in Canada in 1972, and on September 28th of that year, an estimated 18 million of them were watching this.
The long pass to Phil Esposito going in, he shoots! Oh, right in front of the net. Esposito banged that. Here's another shot by Cournoyer. His goal! Canada has tied it up. And the Cournoyer has it on that wing. Here's a shot. Henderson made a wild stab for it and fell. Here's another shot. Right in front of the score. Henderson has scored for Canada. Henderson right in front of the net. And the fans of the team are going wild. Henderson right in front of the goal with 34 seconds left in the game. Tried and played it back to the goal. 2 seconds. The game is over. And Canada have won the series. They defeated the Soviets 6-5.
Considering how many people in Canada were watching the game on TV, you might say September 28th, 1972 was the day when Canada shut down. In fact, I know 3 guys who did say it, and they said it in a book, When Canada Shut Down, commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Summit Series between Team Canada and Team Russia. And these fine-looking gentlemen join us tonight. And here they are, Sean Mitten, Paul Patskou, and Alex Braverman, the 3 amigos. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey, Glenn, good to see you again.
Yeah.
So, Sean, you wrote a previous book on the Summit Series. What was your inspiration for this volume, and how did the partnership with Alex and Paul come about?
Sure. So, going back to the 40th anniversary, there was an event that happened at the Hockey Hall of Fame. And it was during that process that I met Paul. And, one of the great things was he has access to so many unbelievable assets regarding the 72 series, and including he had the CBC radio call by Bob Cole. So that's kind of how he got, involved, if you will. And so we got, to meet each other, have a good friendship. And, as the 50th anniversary came around, Paul said, what do you think about doing a book around the 50th, but we'll do it a little bit different perspective. We'll do more broader stories and include more from a Soviet perspective. And so, this being probably the last time this opportunity will happen, I thought it was a great idea. And certainly he had a relationship with Alex Braverman as well, who's been really instrumental in connecting with us with some of the Russian hockey community. So between the 3 of us, we've had a great team in putting together 72 stories. And really, it's been quite a journey over the last year.
Paul, you've had contact with many of the Summit Series participants on both sides over the years. We're going to show a photo of you and Alexander Yakushev. Tell us what the story is behind this picture, and also tell us why you wanted to revisit the Summit Series in this book.
So they can forget about this picture, I guess. This is at the when Yakushev was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. This is in the hotel beforehand, and we're talking. he does understand English because the joke's on me. I don't know. I can't remember what it was all about, but he's a nice fellow, big guy, and very approachable. And obviously, somebody made a joke, and it must have been on me because Big Yak is looking at me, and I don't remember.
So, why did you want to get involved with a Summit Series project? Because this isn't your first rodeo when it comes to the Summit Series.
No, I've worked on documentaries and books and all kinds of things to do with the 72 series, and it still fascinates me. I mean, if Paul Henderson can watch that goal and still get shivers up his spine, anybody can, and I do too. Just, the 50th was important. It might be the last thing we're going to do on it. We have to do it differently. It has to be different. And I think we've done that with the book for sure, and the documentary.
And Alex, you've also had connections with players on both teams. I want to show a couple of photos. One of you with Phil Esposito, and in a second we'll show another one, you with Brad Park. So tell me how you got involved with these members and several others from the Summit Series.
First of all, I want to add, sometimes I want to pinch myself and wake up. I still can't believe I'm on the journey together with these two individuals. For the record, I'm not a writer and I'm not a hockey historian. Yes, as all Soviet kids, I love hockey and grew up with hockey. But I got really involved with hockey when my son started playing competitive hockey back here in Florida. And, he was playing travel team. And it's not big competition in Florida. So we've been playing the same teams over and over again. And one day I said, yeah, we should do something different. I started inviting teams from Eastern Europe, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Russia, of course. And every time kids would come, I would host a few kids in my house. I saw that it will generate some interest in Russian culture and Russian language with my son. And after he started playing, I had free time on my hands. So I come up with the idea of doing the Russian Heritage Night in Florida. We done one night here, and then next year 5 nights, and then 12 nights year after. During one of the night, I met Paul, and we become friends. And when he told me about Sean and what he wants to do with the new book, I said, yeah, I would like to help you, and the rest of the history.
Sean, one of the unique aspects of your book is that you get to quote from intermission TV interviews during the Summit Series, including one I want you to talk about from a less than enthusiastic NHL president, Clarence Campbell.
Yes. We found so many jewels in going through all the intermissions. And in this instance, I was going through CBC Radio, the game in Winnipeg. And so there was a great interview with Clarence Campbell. And as he was talking, he discussed the series as in this form of inconvenient. And so when you think about one of the greatest international, if not the greatest international hockey series ever, and the president of the NHL talks about it being inconvenient, it kind of makes your ears perk up a little bit. But if you put the context a little bit, when you think back about 1972, it was really an incredible time in hockey history, because really there was multiple things happening. There was expansion. So you had the Atlanta Flames and the New York Islanders coming into the league. And by the way, happy 50th to both of those organizations and now the Calgary Flames. But you also had the WHA as well. And of course, that created a little bit of chaos with things happening with guys going over, like Bobby Hull as an example. So there was a lot happening that summer. And then in addition to that, when they were putting the agreement together between the Soviets, it wasn't just the NHL and the NHLPA. There was also Hockey Canada, and at that time, the Canadian Association of Amateur Hockey. So you have multiple organizations who had different interests. And it was, it could be very complicating in trying to make sure everybody was happy and getting things put together. And so I can understand Mr. Campbell saying that it was in somewhat of an inconvenience, because there was a lot going on in the summer of '72.
Let's just say that quote didn't age well. Paul Patskou is both a co-author of this book and a subject of one of the stories. Before we discuss that, here's a clip from last week's Hockey Time Machine. 3 big-time Canadian filmmakers singing Paul's praises.
This whole series does not happen without Paul Patskou, who is, of course, one of the producers of Hockey Time Machine, but it absolutely doesn't happen. And if you talk to any archival researcher, if you talk to any hockey druid in this country and around the world, they will know that Paul Patskou is and has an incredible trove of knowledge and artifacts. And there is no way we could have, combed through or drilled down on the gold in amongst all of this archive without Paul's guidance and expertise. And we were just incredibly lucky to have him as a collaborator from the very beginning. He was one of the first calls. Absolutely.
Can I just say, he was so into this project, Nick. I mean, I think the 3 of us were out talking. Maybe there might have been a beer involved or what have you. And then an issue came up about something that needed to be determined. Did somebody do this or do that? And so Robert goes, "Oh, well, let's just text Paul Patskou." Before the next beer was served, Patskou had an email or a text back to Robert answering the question as to whether I don't know, the 6th goal in Game 7 was scored by Parise and who assisted. It was so amazing. Paul Patskou, this could never have happened without him.
And it's not just this particular documentary. Paul and I have had the great pleasure of working together for many years, and I had mentioned that the series had been destroyed, and Paul, along with me and other people, worked extensively for years and years and years to collect material to put these games back together again. And without his effort and his knowledge and his determination and dedication, I don't think any one of us single-handedly ever would have been able to do that.
They talking about me?
Apparently you made a good impression.
Hey, those 3 and the 4th one, Dave Bedini, all at the top of the line producers. They've all award winners. I mean, if they say I did a good job, then I'll accept it. They're good to work with too. I mean, it was a long struggle, and some of the elements from the documentary were used for the book, and vice versa. So it's by the way, I also want to talk about Alex Braverman first. I became friends with Alex when he invited me up to the private box there, when he came with the Heritage, when he had caviar just for me. So after that, I was his friend. Okay.
Another thing about this book, Paul, is that you incorporate game footage and what was said not only during the intermissions, but during the games as well. It's part of the fabric of the book. So your ability to retrieve this material not only helped with the documentary, which premieres September 14th, but it's a big part of the fabric woven into the book too.
It is. And hearing the audio that people haven't heard 50 years ago, and I won't spoil by saying the whole thing about at the end of Game 7 what Fred Scambatti says, but you learn things, and having the intermissions gives you a different perspective, especially the radio ones, because most people were watching TV at the time, so they wouldn't have heard these. Not that they could remember them, but there's it's nice to be able to have that stuff. See, because I worked on previous documentaries, I accumulated all these things. Now, the intermissions from the TV, that's a long story in itself. And, the byproduct of that is that Sean has found people who, of the 3,000 Canadians that went over there and appeared on the intermissions in the background, Sean found them. We actually presented them with footage of them being from the interviews from 50 years ago. And I think that's tremendous. I love to see myself 50 years ago too.
Paul, one more footnote about that treasure trove of items that you found 50 years ago. It even included a lot more than just the Summit series. The book says that you found something like 150 Betamax tapes of all kind of international competitions from the 70s and 80s.
That's right. When I got home, I opened up the box and I see something labeled Game 9. Now, this was 1997, around then, and I didn't remember it at all. I said, what could Game 9 be? And it was the Czech game, and it was never saved anywhere else. So that's something that we're hoping to put in the DVD set. And also there were the Gretzky Junior games and over 100 international games from the 70s, with Russia against Canada and tournaments and things. Yeah, that was a good deal,
Hey, Glenn, I want to share a story and kind of, back up something Ravi said about how Paul's able to find things that you just wouldn't expect, but do it quickly. So one of the stories that we found by going through the intermissions and all the commercials, for that matter, is that Labatt's was doing one of the first really, really big customer type of engagement campaigns. And there wasn't social media, so it wasn't though you could respond via Twitter or Facebook. But back then they were doing it what's called the Best on Ice campaign or award through Labatt's. It really was who was the MVP of the tournament from the Canadian side. And so, the deal is if you picked your player, you sent in through a PO box in Montreal, Vancouver, Toronto. And so, then the question was if whoever won the game or the series vote would get this 1973 Mustang. And so one of the things that was hard to find was, who won this Mustang? And so sure enough, Paul did some due diligence, and we found that not one person won, but two people won. And the vote was so close that, in the first four games of the series, Phil Esposito was leading as the most valuable player. Of course, Henderson scoring the last three games, the game winners, and then he took the lead, but he won by less than 1%. So they end up, basically giving the cars to both players. And Paul found the video footage of them both receiving the cars with the keys coming from Harry Sinden on Hockey Night in Canada on a game that was like October 28th. It's like, Paul, how'd you find this? And, it really didn't take him that long, but that's just one story of many of, when you're digging and you're finding things, Paul just finds them and he's just incredible.
I'm glad that they didn't work it out where like Phil had the car on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and Paul had it Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and then they had to flip a coin for Sunday.
Well, we talked to Paul about the car. They kept it, and his wife drove it for years. Yeah.
When we showed it to the Henderson family, Alton said, "Isn't that the car that my aunt crashed?" And so sure enough, she got rear-ended by somebody. That nice Mustang went in the ditch, and that's part of the Henderson family stories.
Yeah.
I was feeling so good right up until about 7 seconds ago. Alex, I think in some ways you may have had, I imagine, the hardest job because you had to connect with people connected with Team Russia. How did that all come about? How did you contact them and get them to cooperate in the telling of these stories?
As I mentioned before, when I invited teams over from Russia to play the tournaments, I got friendly with kids, with parents, with coaches, and eventually with the hockey academies. And then I went up to Hockey Federation. So when occasion arise and questions become, we were looking for answers, I contacted the Russian Hockey Federation, and we arranged the first meeting with three superstars, Mikhailov, Yakushev and Tretiak. And we did the interview last year with all three of them. And then as we go, we contact different people. Like we spoke with grandson of Anatoly Tarasov. We spoke with the son of Arkady Chernyshov, who's another coach. We spoke with the son of Max Petrov. Son of Vladimir Petrov. His name is Max, and many other people. And one of the crucial contact was we call him Stickman or hockey Stickman. He was like equipment coach during the series in Moscow part of it, and he will spend his time on the bench. His name is Alexei Kachetkov. He gave us 100%. He gave us all different stories, different angles, different aspects of the stories.
Let's follow up with that, Alex. What was it like talking to the grandson, Alexei Tarasov, the grandson of the legendary Soviet coach? And as part of your answer, educate for people who don't know who Anatoly Tarasov was and why he's such an important figure in hockey history, and he gets his due in the book. So if you'll describe both of those things.
Anatoly Tarasov was like people often refer to him, father of Russian hockey. He came up with the coaching techniques, and he basically set up the physical, education and training process for Soviet hockey teams. He originally played with Bobrov at the same team, and he was dreaming about playing the hockey. NHL professionals all his life. He was building the teams to it, and even one of his exercise was it's called "Kill the Canadians." So he was preparing them for a physical game aspect of the game, and the punishing of the players. And unfortunately, he didn't coach during the series. And these questions rise very often. What would happen if he would coach? If it was him on the bench, not Bobrov? And we got different answers. Some of the players said, the winning was his nature. He was all about the winning. So he would probably do something different in Moscow. But we never will find the right answer because it didn't happen.
You mentioned Bobrov, who was the coach for Team Russia in the Summit Series. And the book also goes into some detail about the fact that Tarasov and Bobrov, even though they lived very close to each other, did not get along.
Yes, you can't call them enemies. They were friendly, but they dislike each other. And it started during their time together on the team. So like you said, even they live in the same building. Alexei told us an episode when they, one of them were leaving the courtyard of the building, another was coming in, and the two cars was stand across each other, and nobody wants to wait the right of going in or out. So they were standing there for an hour and without moving and see who's going to win.
Yeah, I think there was a Dr. Seuss book like that too. They kind of stand nose to nose and neither one is going to move aside.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of offspring, Sean, the book includes memories from Alton McDermott, who is Paul Henderson's grandson, as well as Max Tretiak, Vladislav Tretiak's grandson. Why was including them important to you?
Well, one of the things that we wanted to accomplish is we want to make sure that these stories get passed down to the younger generations. And so in doing so, we thought it'd also be great to understand from their perspective, what it was like to grow up, with these legends, if you will. So what was it like for Alton to grow up with his dad as this hero, and the same with Max? And, it was really fascinating because, it started off, he talked when he was young, and they'd go to for example, a Chinese restaurant, and people would come up to his grandpa and tell stories. And so he knew his grandpa was popular, but he didn't necessarily know to what extent. And then as he got, through getting into his education, I think it was in grade 3, he told a story of coming into the classroom. And when he looked up on the wall of his math class, he saw the picture of Henderson being hugged by Cournoyer. And so at that point, he kind of figured, wow, this is kind of a big deal. And then later on, and probably I think it was around grade 7, he did a class report on the 72 series, and that really took him to another layer. And so, through this process, I said, Dalton, we'd really like to get the feedback of somebody who's younger. And just to give context, he's a hockey player at Canisius in Buffalo, so he's going on his own hockey journey. And I said, would you be supportive in looking at our outlines, taking a look at our stories? And we had some wonderful discussions. And, as we went through the process, he said, Sean, there's probably 70% of the stuff here that I've never heard of before. So we felt like we were on the right track because we were really getting feedback from somebody who was young, who was passionate, who wanted to know more. And, on the flip side, we also want to do the same thing for Tretiak's grandson. And Alex, through his connections in Russia, we were kind of fortunate because Max Tretiak plays in the KHL. And right after the Olympics, there was a COVID, outbreak as such. And so the KHL was paused. And Alex was able to get a meeting that happened one afternoon while Max's young daughter was sleeping. And so Max, sitting in a car in a parking lot, basically had a Zoom call with us. And then we brought Alton McDermott in, and they were able to have a half-hour conversation, which, was probably one of the most fascinating and enjoyable things through the book journey that we've had.
Paul is a historian. Speak to me about the Russian goalie, Tretiak, who later became head of the country's hockey federation, because this is fascinating to me. As the book points out, he is as beloved by players and fans in Canada as he is in Russia.
Yeah, I think this is a question for Alex to answer. I must say, we couldn't have done the book without Alex because, take the last part of Game 8, and we know what the Canadians are feeling about it, players and the tension and all that, but we don't know what's going on the Russian bench. But Alex got in touch with a stick boy there, and now in the book, we can tell you what the Russians were thinking on the bench at that time. It's all new material. Now, the stick boy and Tretiak had a relationship, and I think that Alex can talk about that right now.
Well,
yes, the guy we mentioned before, Alexei Kachetkov, he was actually backup goalie in the youth club of CSKA. When Tretiak started his career, he was playing for a team as a two-year younger than all other boys. So Alexei was there too as a second goalie. He couldn't make it. He didn't survive the competition, I guess. And I'm joking. It was just some health problem. But they become friends, and they still friends for till now. And as a matter of fact, they had a wedding anniversary at almost the same time. They had the kids, two of them, boy and girl, and then each of them has boy and girl. And even this story about scouting report from Toronto Maple Leaf scouters who came to Russia and gave the report back later on the Soviet team, and they would say the weakest part in the Soviet team is the goalie, because they were watching game between CSKA and the national team, and a report say the goalie let 8 goals in, and actually in newspaper here in Canada it was says the game took place after the Tretiak wedding, but we put the numbers together and we figured out his wedding was August 23rd. The game was August 22nd. So it's actually night before wedding, not after the wedding. It wasn't hangover. It was Tretiak's worriness about upcoming wedding. He was afraid it's not going to happen because something may happen to him in the game, or maybe schedule will change and he will have to go, instead of go home, he will have to go back to base. And so he actually led 4 goals in the first period, 1 goal in the second period, and 3 goals in the third period of that game. And maybe this report would help in the future Soviet teams, because all Canadian newspaper will project bad team, bad goalie, we're going to win, it's going to be a piece of cake, we will win all 8 games in a row. And here we come, September 2, Montreal game, and we all know what happened.
Kochetkov, Alex, one of the most unlikely stories in the book, because he goes from being a stick boy, an equipment manager in 72. Eventually, he serves as general manager of the Russian national junior team from 2006 to 2019, as the book points out. Alex, that is quite a success story for a former stick boy.
Yeah, yes, he's still active with the Russian Hockey Federation, and he gave us all other stories. One of them was, I don't know if we should tell all of them, but one of them was about the Andrei Vasilevsky, and I suggest you probably purchase the book and read it, and you will find out what happened with him before he became a 2 Stanley Cup winner.
Paul, the question from a Canadian perspective would be, why do you think Tretiak is so beloved on this side of the water? And how close did he come to becoming an NHL goalie?
Well, that's all in the book too. And it's surprising that he was approached by different teams. And of course, back in those days, he wasn't going to leave, and nobody was going to defect at that point. And yeah, he's loved because he's generally a nice person. If you meet him, you'll see that, and he can joke about something that happened 50 years ago. He told Paul Henderson, says, I know why you scored that winning goal, because bad goaltending. I mean, he's just a great guy. And his style, and even goalies from Canada, like Ed Belfour for one, like they copied him. They took his number and everything. He just he's not like Mikhailov, who was agitator. He was a guy that was minding his own business, and just at 19 years old too. You have to remember how young he was, and he played all the 8 games together. So, he's. He spent a lot of time in North America. He's a goalie coach with the Blackhawks and other things. So he's well known, and he made the Hall of Fame too.
Yeah. Glenn, if I could just add to that a little bit. In 1984, he was drafted by the Montreal Canadiens, and we have a story in there about that. You'll have to read why in some ways it didn't work out, but at that point, he went on to retire in somewhat of a young age, because I think he still could have played for a number of years. But he ended up coming over to North America and doing a series of goalie coaches, both in the U.S. And in Canada. And, he just had a tremendous impact on people, because they could see the focus in his eyes. They could see how he really wanted to help goalies become better. And he made some really good relationships. And not only was he a great goalie, but he was really an ambassador of hockey. And just to take that one step further, right after the Canada Cup happened, where people remember the Soviets dominated that final game against Team Canada, which was loaded, had guys like Gretzky on it. He actually invited Wayne Gretzky back to Russia for somewhat of a tourist trip, and brought back Gretzky's family with him. So there was Walter Gretzky, Glenn Gretzky at that time, his girlfriend, Vicky Moss. And, really the relationship between Tretiak and Gretzky is really interesting. I think that would have been another story in the book, but we had quite a few Tretiak stories as it was. But I think, the relationship they had, and even when Tretiak did a book in the mid-'80s, the person who did the forward for the book was Wayne Gretzky. So, I think he's a fascinating person, a Soviet who really had a lot of personality. And, I think a lot of people today consider him a great ambassador of the game. And I have never heard anybody that I talked to say a bad word about Tretiak.
Another interesting thing you dug up, Sean, for the book was he actually wrote academic papers about goaltending. He was really thinking the game. And there's a quote here that I found really interesting. I still consider character the most important condition. So with all the attributes physically that he brought to the position, going up, going down, and so on, battling for every puck, even in practices, that he considered character to be the most important quality for a netminder.
And this was another fascinating point about him, and I'm glad you brought it up, Glenn. One of the big influences for Tretiak growing up was actually his mom. And his mom was a physical education teacher, and she definitely instilled a lot of the qualities that Tretiak had. But think back to the 72 series. He's 20 years old. Not only did he get his undergraduate degree in physical education, but he also went on to get his master's. And so again, at a young age in his 20s, he's doing a thesis paper on what else? Goaltending. So that, to me, that is incredible, because he really was a student of the game, but it was also the way he thought about the game. So, it wasn't just about being the best in doing on-ice conditioning and on-ice practicing. He was taking his craft and looking at different things he could do off the ice. And so, there's a lot of stories about Tretiak using different exercises, throwing the tennis balls against the wall, which, are drills that kids still do today. But he was kind of the guy who was leading in those areas. But the other thing, he was also thinking about the character aspects, to your point. And, how many 20-year-old kids are thinking, if I'm going to be the best hockey player that I can be, what characteristics do I need to really be effective? So just the mindset that he had as a young boy, or a young man at that time, to me is just fascinating. And I think a lot of players aren't necessarily fully students of the game. They think they are when they come to the rink, but there's a lot more that's included. And, Tretiak's a great example.
One other member of Team Russia that I want to mention, the book heaps well-deserved praise on Alexander Yakushev, how Phil Esposito, no less, asked him if he'd like to play with the Bruins. So, Alex, what was it like dealing with Yakushev more recently? And tell us, what was he like as a player?
As a player, everybody loved it. He was named best player of the game a few times during the series, and he was most probably hard player to play against too. But when we had the conversation with him in our recent interviews, he's very smart, and he was very emotional, actually, 50 years later about the series. And the question we asked him about, who won, who lost the series. And he almost, cry, I guess. He said, of course, it was a winner there. Of course, we all know who win that. And too bad it wasn't us. But in general, everybody won. And Tretiak echoed him and said, yes, this series was a big success. And everybody won. The fans, the hockey players, the game of hockey won at the end. So it was no losers, no winners in the series, according to them.
And Alex, Sean was mentioning Wayne Gretzky a moment ago. And in the book, it's revealed that he and Mark Messier, Gretzky and Messier, spoke glowingly of Yakushev and how they even would call a great play Yakushevian.
Yeah, it is in 1 hour story too, and it's few other stories there. So go ahead, Sean.
I was just going to add to that. Glenn, when they actually had lunch with Yak, Messier and Gretzky did, and they told him that story. They said that when this happens in practice and somebody makes a great play, and so when that story was told to him, he had tears rolling down his face, because he really had no idea that he had that type of impact in North America and specifically Canada. So that made him feel so good. And I think he could have easily played in the NHL, and the guys knew that, but just the timing didn't work out, but he was an incredible player in the series and well respected in North America.
Sean, take us through the first two games. Russia surprises Canada in the first game. Canada comes back after losing in Montreal. They win in Toronto. What, from listening to the various player accounts, was the difference between the first and second games?
Well, the first game was really its own entity, if you will. You can imagine, first of all, the expectations were unbelievably high that Canada was going to win game one in Montreal. And so, if you rewind the game back in the first 5 or 6 minutes, Canada is leading 2-0. And so at that point, you're thinking, well, all the prognostications are going to come true. Here, it's going to be a whitewash. It's going to be 8-1 or whatever it is. And, the Soviets never panicked. And in fact, in some of the interviews that they had, they said there was no question that they were nervous before game one. And certainly it showed. When they were singing "Oh Canada," when the fans were cheering, they weren't used to that type of Canadian fandom, if you will. But certainly as the game wore on, their conditioning really took over. And, to make matters even more interesting, if you will, it was a very hot day in Montreal at that time. It was like 80 degrees. And, even the fans who were sitting in the seats who I've interviewed, they've said we were literally sweating in the upper seats in the Montreal Forum. So you had that and the poor conditioning. And after a while, I think the Canadians knew they were a little bit in trouble. And of course, the game ended up 7-3. One of the quotes in the intermissions by Howie Meeker, he kind of joked that he thought the Canadian team were skating with sandpaper behind their skates. So I thought that was a great quote. But transitioning to the second game, Glenn, is they changed the lineup a bit. Instead of chasing the puck and chasing the Soviets, which was not a winning situation for them, they became much more physical. They started trying to be physical and wear them down. And in fact, with some of the Soviets had said when asked about the defense on Team Canada, is not only did they hit often, but they hit hard. And I don't think they were used to that level of physical contact. And definitely game two in Toronto, when Team Canada won 4-1, that was definitely a different style of game. And some of the players who came in at that time were also more physical in nature. So it was good that it kind of evened the series up right away after those two games in Labor Day in 1972. And that kind of, led to an interesting story going into Winnipeg.
They tie in Winnipeg, and then Sean, you write about Team Canada's Game 4 loss, which put them down 2-1 with that tie in the series. This is what you say in the book, quote, "Many Canadian hockey fans think Esposito's heartfelt words in a post-game interview was the turning point in the series. But you explain that the real turning point, for several reasons, actually came in Sweden. Explain that."
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, I think anybody who kind of paid attention to the series remembers what we call the Espo rant, after game 4. And, there was some booing in Vancouver, and that was tough to hear because the guys were really giving it their all. And I think the turning point really was for the Canadian fans to kind of get behind the team, which in that way it was great. But, one of the people we interviewed was Brad Park. And, Brad said, we never even heard what Esposito said. Really, where we came together was in Sweden. And, what happened was it was 2 tough games in Sweden. And he kind of joked that, we took our aggression out on the Swedes. It was a very physical, often nasty and bloody 2 games. But it was also an opportunity for the guys to get to know each other because, if you think back then, just before the original 6, where the guys didn't like each other, they didn't get to know each other on the other teams. It was, the guys from Montreal didn't want to talk to the guys in Boston. And so there wasn't that bonding that you see in best on best teams today, like in the Olympics. So really Sweden was an opportunity to get together. During that period, one of the things that happened was Guy Lapointe, had a child. And so they were able to celebrate one night in Sweden and kind of get together. And when you're having a couple brown pops in a different country and kind of bonding, in some ways that kind of brings people together a little bit. So, in Brad's estimation, he said really that was the time when we got together, and then just before Moscow, we were starting to really pick up steam, and also conditioning as well. So the Esposito was memorable, but really for the team, Sweden was what kind of brought everything together.
Another thing that was an important factor and a turning point, and I'd like to get all three of you to discuss this, was the 3,000 fans who, it's been mentioned, made the trek to Moscow. And you have several stories from fans in the book. So, Sean, why don't you lead us off? Maybe you can tell the Bill and Carol Castle story, and then Paul and Alex can weigh in. Alex can tell us why maybe this was unusual for the Russians in the stands to see how Canadian fans reacted and so on. But Sean, get us started.
Yeah, certainly. First of all, Carol Castle and Bill Castle were tremendous contributors to our book. And so what was really so interesting about that was, when they went to Moscow, first of all, it was just going to be Bill and the brother-in-law, Lar. And when they found out another couple of their friends were going, Carol wanted to go. And so she went to the U of T travel agency and got one of the last ticket packages available. So she nearly wasn't able to attend. So they ended up going. And what's incredible is that Carol kept a diary, and she wrote in it every day. And over a 10-day period, in my best estimation, she probably wrote over 7,000 words. And she was kind enough to share that with us. And we have a whole story about what we call the Castle Diary. But one of the great entries in that, we found that in Game 6, she mentioned that her husband was in behind the scenes from one of the Johnny Esau interviews. So, courtesy of Paul, we were able to go in through all the different intermissions and actually find it and show them the video of Bill Castle being behind Johnny Esau in Game 6. So, it was really just an incredible moment to share them, to show the video and see himself 50 years earlier, because they'd never seen it before. So that was pretty cool as we had our dialogues with the Castles. And again, they were just fantastic people to interact with. And
another person we found during the working on the book and during the, we look at the video Paul provided of after games and the intermissions. And at the Game 5 intermission, it was an interview with some Canadian fans. And we saw the little girl who was giving the interview. And, she was wearing the Maple Leafs jersey, Moscow Maple Leaf jersey. And it grabbed my attention somehow. And I start digging in it. And I want to know what the Moscow Maple Leafs for. And we found the girl, and she's, 50 years older now. And we were able to show her the video from the 50 years ago. And she said, now I have a real proof. I keep telling my friends I was there. I was at the game. I was interviewed. Nobody believed me. So now I have proof of it. And her story is a part of our story too. But the main difference between the fans in Russia, it was, I think, 14,000 people in Luzhniki, 3,000 Canadian fans. The Russian fans were real fans, I would say. Most of the tickets to the game was given to the upper level professional or the doctors, lawyers. So the normal fan could afford to get the tickets. He couldn't get the tickets to the game, and that was a big difference also. And if every Canadian player saying our fans support us and we feel that support during the games, I would say Soviet players couldn't say that, because the Soviet fans were as loud as the Canadian fans during that games.
Paul, there is a lot of debate constantly about, do fans make a difference? Do the players hear the fans? Well, I don't know if it's always true that they make a difference, but there's no question, and reading the book makes clear, the fans, the Canadian fans in Moscow, made a difference.
Oh, you better believe it. All the players said the same thing, especially after Game 5 when they lost after they were leading. And you've got the Canadian fans standing up and singing "Oh Canada" and cheering them. Now that you have to think that had some good effect on the team, and obviously it did. They came back and won 3 straight, and there's Aki Kukovic there. There's also, you know, the players themselves. In the documentary, Peter Michalowicz is interviewed, and he asks, well, how did you win those last 3 games? And he says it was the fans that won it. And then he starts breaking down emotionally that he remembers the fans cheering them on, and that spurred them, along with the telegrams. And if they didn't do that, they probably wouldn't have won. And they all say the same thing. You know, it's yeah. I also have to say that I watched the games live. I stayed home from school. Alex was in the Soviet Union watching them there. Sean's got a poor excuse saying he's only 3 years old, but you know, you really have to experience the atmosphere, the tension, the Cold War, and everything to really know how important it was to win. And I was one of those that thought, well, they're not going to do anything after they lost Game 5. Oh, they're going to win 3 in a row. But, you know, someone named Paul Henderson had the Henderson hat trick, and he came through. So, yeah, it's a happy story at the end.
All right, let's talk about the Henderson hat trick, because this deserves more attention. Now, the Game 8 goal gets all the love, and Henderson himself says, hey, that was a garbage goal. It was the Game 7 goal when I beat 4 Russian defenders. That was the one that I'm really impressed by. And even more so. So he scores the game-winning goal in Game 6, Game 7, and Game 8, the Henderson hat trick. And by the way, he scored in Game 5 as well. But he also suffered a concussion in Game 5. And that, to me, is what is really remarkable, that he's even playing, let alone starring in the Henderson hat trick. Sean?
Yeah, you know, you're exactly right. I mean, you know, it's Game 5. It's like late in the second period. Henderson's going in on Tretiak. He gets tripped up and he goes into the boards. And so there's a great picture, I believe, by Denny Brodeur of basically Henderson's head, which snapped back into the boards, and he's got his 2 feet up over his ears. And, you know, as we've heard that, you know, he said he got knocked out for a little bit, and no question there was a concussion. But this was, again, like just a few minutes left in the second period. So when we're listening to the intermissions, and there was interviews, I think on either CBC Radio or CTV, there was an interview with Ken Dryden, and they're saying, you know, is there a possibility that Henderson will come back for the third period? Well, certainly he does. In today's game, that would absolutely not happen. So within like the first few minutes of the third period, Henderson gets a second goal of the game on top of an assist. So here's a guy who probably got concussed. He got knocked out into the boards. He ends up scoring 2 goals and assist, and was a player of the game for Game 5. And, you know, a lot of people forget that game because then he goes on and scores the game winner in the next 3 games. So it's, you know, what a series he had just on the Moscow side.
And one more point about his Game 8 last-minute goal. So he gets hooked right before by a Russian player and gets spun into the boards. He gets spun and bangs against the same boards in which he got a concussion in Game 5. He could have been concussed again, but this time he takes it as a body blow. He gets up, and because he was spun into the board, none of the Russian defenders are paying any attention to him. So Paul, he's able to skate right back into the crease. Nobody's covering him, and bingo.
Yeah, that was all Esposito. And Paul Henderson jumped on the ice. He called off Michalowicz, and he came off, and Paul he was driven. He could have been smacked into the board, but I don't think that would have affected him. He wanted to score. And back to Game 5 again, we were lucky to interview Joe Skroll, the trainer, for the series. And after 50 years, and no one has ever interviewed him or asked him about what his thoughts were and things that were going on. It's remarkable. So we interviewed him. He told us about what Paul Henderson was going through after the concussion and what the doctors were saying. And Red Berenson also was saying that they wouldn't even let the doctor on the ice, the Soviet officials. So there's a lot of things in the book that you'll see that are different. And also we interviewed Rick Noonan, who was the trainer behind the Russian bench for the first few games in Canada. And he's got unique perspectives as well. And, that sort of things in the book where we talk about things that normally people wouldn't have known.
Sean, circling back to the fans, I have to mention one in particular.
Okay.
The Canadian bugler, Pierre Plouffe.
Yeah.
He made a name for himself, and certainly he was known as the bugling part. But, one of the stories that you may have been heard of before that, the question is, were Canadian fans well behaved? And for the most part, they were. In some ways, they talk about people celebrating and partying like it's a Grey Cup weekend, which they did. Certainly there was a lot of vodka and champagne. But one night, Pierre got a little bit upset. It was the end of, kind of like the last call, if you will. And my understanding is he wanted to buy a couple of drinks for some of the French Canadian players, the Montreal Canadian players. And he was basically cut off. And he got upset about it and ended up breaking some glass, some mirrors in the hotel. And that got him in trouble. And then he, argued vehemently with some of the Russian police, but he ended up having to go to Russian jail for a night or two. And so the Canadian Embassy of Moscow had to get involved. And, it was kind of one of the only black mark situations, if you will, of Canadians in Moscow. But certainly it was an interesting story for sure.
Alex, from the Russian perspective, they've been asked over and over and over again the same questions and have been remarkably generous and good sports and been willing to answer the same questions over and over again about what had to be a painful experience in some ways. Why do you think that they have been so generous in coming back and talking about the Summit Series over the years?
As Boris Mikhailov told us during one of the interview, he said this series was first one, and it's never going to be this series the same attitude. And even 50 years later, we're still talking about that because it gave a lot to every one of us. Yeah, we were enemy before, but we're friends now, and all of them said the same thing. The Yakushev and Tretiak, they would say, we made a lot of friends on the ice after the game, and during the game we're players. It's a game time, but after the game we're friends, and unfortunately we can't celebrate the way we were planning to celebrate this year. But it is what it is. That's why we, making new movies and new books and trying to keep the story alive.
The Soviets do feel like by taking the Canadians down to the wire, they were proving something, and maybe not just for Russian hockey, but indeed all of European hockey.
Yeah, yes, don't forget the history of Soviet hockey was much younger than Canadian history. They only started playing in 1946. During this short time, they accomplished a lot on the international arenas. They become Olympic champions, world champions, and yes, it was a questionable situation about professional players and amateur players. They were, trained professionally, but had amateur status, and but they were ready to play against professionals, and there was a lot of unknown factors. But they proved they can be playing the same way as best of the best, and that's why this series is important to everybody.
Alex, Glenn, can I just add to that a little bit? So there's so many people that we could acknowledge in the book that really helped out, and one of the people was Alex Frinson, who's now in Toronto with CBC, and he's had a lot of history relating to the 72 series. But in 1972, he was a 9-year-old boy in the former Soviet Union. And, one of the things that he mentioned was leading up to the series, they really didn't know a lot about the NHL players. And in fact, he might have had, one NHL book back then that he could kind of thumb through. And it was, bad, commentary of what was really happening in the book in terms of, the captions, etc. But after the series, he had a lot more access to NHL or North American type books. So for them, it was also an opportunity to get to know our players. And Bobby Hull was a big name back then after in 74, certainly Esposito and Ken Dryden. So, it was also an education for them about Canadian hockey and things evolved on both sides, really.
There's another subplot to the series that's mentioned in the book, and that is the officiating. Paul sent me an editorial cartoon, which I'm going to show, and it suggests that the referees, especially for the games in Moscow, may have been a little one-sided, perhaps, or maybe the people in Russia on their side who chose the referees, I don't mean the Team Russia, but the executives in the country. So, Paul, what was the subplot of the officiating? And one of the people in the book is somebody who you know well, Steve Dowling, who officiated, I think, Game 2 in Canada, and he had a perspective on the series as well. So if you would speak about that.
Yeah, Steve Dowling did Game 2. He was supposed to do Game 4, but the Russians were upset. See, after the first game, Canada changed their style and they became more belligerent, rough. Cashman was in, it was dressed, and a few others. And the Soviets didn't like the fact that they weren't penalized like they thought they should have been. So they made a fuss saying, well, we don't want those same two referees in Game 4. And so Dowling did not. The Canadians said, okay, we won't, but you owe us one, and we can pick something up later in Russia. And so they had different referees in Game 4. It didn't matter anyways. They got beat badly. And then in Sweden, the two exhibition games there, you had the two West German referees doing both games. And if you see the second game and you see, Ulf Sterner with supposedly taking out Cashman's tongue with a stick, and that's another story we have in the book, and Hadfield, smashing up Schoberg's face and everything. Well, those two German referees got a pretty bad impression of the Canadians. So they went to Russia. They were looking out for anything and everything to call against the Canadians, because they weren't impressed, let's say, with all the rough stuff. They weren't used to it. Okay. So it comes Game 8. The Russians, they want to win now. They weren't so. They were optimistic before, but Game 8 comes and they lost 2 in a row. They want to make sure they have their own referees there, or the ones that they think, let's say it might favor them or whatever. And they wanted these two West Germans, but the Canadians say, no, how about we compromise and we each pick one, and the Canadians pick the Swedish referee, and the Russians said, no, he can't, he's sick, which he wasn't. And so he ended up with Rudy Bada from Czechoslovakia, who was decent, and Kompella from West Germany. And everything started early in the game when, Parise not Parise, it was a different Canadian player. And Foster Hewitt yells out, "That's a dive." Well, then they got other penalties, and JP Parise gets upset and almost decapitates Kampala. And to me, that helped the cause because, for some reason, well, that was the reason, Kampala put his whistle away or lost it, and you never heard from him the rest of the game, and it was calm, except for Eagleson going on the ice, but that wasn't a referee thing. But so much happened in that game 8 that you just can't make it up.
Alex, I want to read a quote from the book and then have you comment on it from Dowling, the referee for game 2. He said in the book about the rough and tumble style of Team Canada and how it caught the Russians by surprise. Quote, "When the Russians played in the Olympics, it was a very gentlemanly game with a kind of prep school civility, a lot of ceremony, a lot of honor." So Alex, the way that Canada eventually decided to play, it took a while for the Russians to adjust to that.
The second game was crucial for Canadian teams because they already lost one game, and they changed the players, they changed the tactics, and the first game was a little bit rough too. But Russian had they were told to tolerate, not to answer back, and some people call them robots because of that, but robotic. But they were ready. They were prepared for the tough games too, and it wasn't easy, but they survived. And yes, they lost the second game, but the next one was tight, and they won the game 4.
Sean, we talk about how the 72 series still resonates and how it's even affected the NHL of today. And we can talk about that for a bit, but I want to go over one way that the book indicates that Vladislav Tretiak, as head of the Russian Federation, definitely has impacted the National Hockey League, and that's with something called the non-Russian goalie tax. What's that?
Yeah, this is fascinating. There was one article that we found that was I can't remember what year it came out, but basically it was an article saying where are all the Russian goalies, and this was back I think in the early 2000s, maybe earlier than that. And now, by the way, if you look at the NHL rosters and who the top goalies are, probably 10 of the top 15 goalies are Russians. I mean, just incredible. But where you're going with, Glenn, is back around 2006. One of the challenges that was happening in the Russian pro leagues where they were taking all the goalies from other countries, so Finland, Sweden, other places, and they weren't really getting a lot of time for the Russian goalies. And so what he did as the head of the federation at that time was he put a tax on to say, listen, if you don't have a Russian goalie playing for a Russian pro team, you're going to have to pay a tax on it. And what that did was stimulate the opportunity for Russian goalies to get more playing time. And of course, they improved and they got more minutes. So, fast forward today, we've evolved to have from Bobrovsky to Vasilevsky. Guys are winning, Vezina trophies now. They're winning Stanley Cups. But, it took a long time before that happened. But really, Tretiak's policy had an incredible impact of what's happening in the National Hockey League today. And it really doesn't get talked about.
And the influx of Russian and, in fact, all non-Canadians in the National Hockey League is so commonplace today, it almost isn't even worth mentioning anymore. But that must have been a surprise when it first started. But going back to the Russian Five with the Detroit Red Wings, to today's Tampa Bay Lightning with Vasilevsky and all the players in between, the face of the NHL has changed. Does the Summit Series, Sean, take any credit for that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. There's certain things that have evolved, and it's not just about the Soviets or Russians at that time, but it was also other European players. And so, for example, like from that Swedish, the 2 exhibition games in Sweden, the Swedes played Team Canada very closely, and of course, 2 of the people who were in that game, and we have a story on this as well, is Börje Salming. So, Börje Salming and Inge Hammarström were 2 of the first Europeans to come over. I believe it was in '73. And we interviewed Börje Salming for the book. And, I'll just say, we hope Börje is all right health-wise. He was recently diagnosed with ALS, a terrible disease. So we hope he's doing fine, and we send our prayers. But he was an incredible person to interview for this book. And, he had such an interesting perspective because he got to play against Team Canada, but he had also had experience against the Soviets as well. So the fact that he was willing to be a part of this book and share his experiences, and then his transition to coming over to the Maple Leafs, he loved his experience with the Maple Leafs. And, in some ways he feels really blessed because not only is he a hero in Sweden, but he's a hero in Canada as well. And that really means a lot to him.
Alex, you, of course, have keyed on the influence of Russian players in the NHL to celebrate them and the fact that they have come over and assimilated into the NHL game.
Yes, during our Russian Heritage Night, we're trying to showcase the Russian players to the community. We're trying to bring the fans together and let them, help them to get to know the Russian players. I also found an interesting book, which is not a book, it's a dictionary, English-Russian dictionary of consists 5,000 words. And every time some rookie coming over and I have a chance to meet him, I will give him as a present the book, and hope it will help him in get accustomed with language, and it's too many things involved, not only language barrier, but the cultural barrier, the different food, different atmospheres. So if we can help in any way to young Russian players, we're trying to do that through our Russian Heritage Night events.
Let me close with this question, and Sean, I'll ask you first and have the other 2 chime in. And if this is an unfair question, tell me so, and we'll just move on. Should world events of 2022 and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, should that have any impact on how we view the Summit Series of '72?
Paul, do you want to go first?
Well, okay, but I see you have no comment. This is a tough question. You guys know I worked on the documentary, and that's a different thing than a book. And they could not ignore what was happening in Ukraine. So you'll see it at the end of episode 3. You'll see some graphic images and things like that. Now, I don't agree having that in there, but they wanted to make sure that they knew, the viewers knew what was going on, and it's a Cold War again, and it was a Cold War in '72, and it had to be in. Now, should it be? Well, you can't ignore it, but we don't touch about that in the book, so we're okay.
Well, let me try to answer, and it's a very difficult question for me, and as you know, when I left, it was one country. It was the Soviet Union. It consists of 15 republics, all different languages, all different culture, but they all were united by Russian language. And when I say Russian Heritage Night, to me, it's not only Russian, it's Ukrainian, Belarusian, Moldavian, Armenian, Georgian. They all speak the same language. Of course, it shouldn't be war. Of course, it should be solve diplomatically, not by arm and weapon. But to me, and that's one thing we're trying to preach, is a term called hockey diplomacy. And I believe the sports and hockey in general should go on and should help countries to get together and break the ice. And I believe it will work if we put all our mind and effort into it.
I appreciate that, Alex, very much, and we all do want that. So, Sean, what, if anything, have I missed? Of course, there's 1,000 more stories in the book, so I'm not trying to get to them all, but tell me what I've missed.
No, you've done a great job, and I will add a point to your question, and it is a tough question. I think, you know, for me personally, war in general, there's no war that I like or want or want to have. It's just war is bad. And I think as we were writing this, you know, it was challenging at times because, you know, you don't want to hear about all the terrible things that are going on, but at the same time, you know, had a job to do to write a book about hockey, and something that happened 50 years ago, and then, you know, we have some reflectionary stories as well. But I think, you know, there were times when, you know, Alex and I worked and had some interviews with people who were in Russia. And, you know, there was a quote, I think it was Paul Henderson, who said, you know, during the series that over the years, they learned that they didn't hate the players, they hated the system. And what they found was over time that they got to really know the players, and, you know, they were just like us. They want to keep their wives happy and pay the bills and the nature of those things. And I think when we had conversations and interviews with people, I'll give you an example with Slava Bykov. And, you know, what a great guy. I mean, all he wanted to do was talk hockey all afternoon. And, you know, we really appreciated his time and sharing all his stories and memories. But for him, you know, it was just about the opportunity to talk hockey. And he's really not that much different than we are. Like, when you have a passion for something, and when you get to know these people, they're nice people and they want to have these conversations. And so I kind of took away, that's what I took away from it, is, you know, it's okay to hate the system, but, you know, a lot of these people are still really good people. And we are very fortunate to have conversations with them at a very difficult time. And those are probably things that I'll reflect on more as time passes and, you know, we finish getting through this. But it was a very unique situation and a difficult situation. And, you know, we can only hope the best that we can get through this quickly.
In the words of the Billy Joel song, we never knew what friends we had until we came to Leningrad.
Well done.
The name of the book is When Canada Shut Down, 72 Amazing Untold Stories from a Canadian and Soviet Perspective, by Sean Mitten, Paul Patskou, and Alex Braverman. Sean, how can people get a hold of this volume?
Great question, Glenn. The good news is we're in the last stage of proof, so we're just getting that. And then, you know, probably in the next week or two, they'll be able to purchase it at a website, lulu.com. And then later times it'll be available on Amazon as well. But, you know, we'd appreciate it if you can go to lulu.com to make a purchase, and it should be available probably in the next week or 10 days. And again, we've appreciated the support of so many people in the Hockey Time Machine community, whether it's photos or feedback or introductions to other people. It really is an incredible community, and kudos to Paul and Laura for what they've done since the beginning of COVID.
If anyone thinks they know the full story, well, they don't. I've been privileged to be able to get an advance copy of the book to read. And I said this about the documentary. It same holds true for the book. Even if you think you know the whole story, you don't. And a lot of the gaps and a lot of the voices that haven't been heard before get an airing with this book. So I encourage you to come out and get it. Any final words, Alex or Paul?
Yeah, we're going to be at the Expo show in Toronto We have a table there, and we're going to have the books there, so you can come buy the book and you can talk to us, and that's in November. And of course, the website, and we'll have different launches and things like that. And yeah, it's been a journey, that's for sure. But we had to do something different. We could have done the same things we've done before, but when we started researching, we learned things we didn't know, and we're supposed to know a lot about it. So if we don't know it, it must be good stuff.
I also want to shout out to a gentleman by the name of John Thompson. John's got a 72 event in Kitchener next Tuesday at 6:00. And John's a unique individual because he's one of the 3,000 Canadians who was in Moscow. And he also leads the Kitchener Sports Association. So if you are able to make a trek to Kitchener on Tuesday night, there's going to be a great event. I'm going to be there. Rod Sealing's going to be there. Dennis Marouk's going to be speaking. So we'll have a number of individuals, and it'll be a fun evening to talk about the series.
Sounds good.
Yeah, one thing came out from interview with Brad Park. He said, when we were in Russia, we all liked the Russian champagne. And I hope one day we'll all get together and we'll have a drink of Russian champagne all together.
Well, before we go, let me see if I can find that photo again. It looks like
I presented the bottle to him, yes.
Yeah. No wonder you and he are such good pals.
Yeah,
they're neighbors in Florida. Yeah.
How can you not be friends over a bottle of Russian champagne?
Yeah.
All right. Sean, Paul, Alex, good guys and guys that I'm proud to call friends. Thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate it and look forward to reading the book when it comes out in the next few days.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
Thanks,
okay. And good night for Hockey Time Machine.
Bye-bye.